Okay, so we're going to be talking about Native Americans in social studies. We're going to focus on the different kinds or the different tribes of Native Americans that used to live here in what is now Texas. We're going to start off with the Native Americans that used to live in the Gulf coastal plains. Before we read through this information, before we look at this, there are some questions at the end that I want to go ahead and read before we go through the information, just so that way while we're reading, we know what we need to look out for and what we need to slow down and find. So the questions are on slide 10 and on slide 11. There are 4 questions here on slide 10, 2 questions on slide 11. On slide 10, our questions are: describe the Texas Gulf Coast Plains and name 2 Native American groups that once lived there. So the first question is actually a 2-part question. Number 1, describe the Gulf Coastal Plains. Number 2, tell them 2 Native American groups that lived there. The next question says, name 1 way the environment impacted the lifestyle of the Caddo. So when they use the word impacted, what they mean is to tell them a way that the environment, the area around them, the way the land was, the way the weather was, how did that change the lifestyle that they had? Number 3, name 2 Native American groups that live in Texas today. So it's similar to that first question we read, but this one is asking about Native American groups that we might still have here in Texas today. Question 4, what is the significance of the word Tejas? So significance means why is it important or what makes it important. We want to keep an eye out for where we see that word Tejas in our passage. On slide 11, we have name 2 ways that the Karankawa lifestyle was different from the Caddo lifestyle. We can already see that they're asking us about 2 different groups of Native Americans here, and they want us to tell them how their lives were different from one another. And the last question, what is an Indian reservation? So while we're reading, when we see that word reservation, we want to make sure that we slow down, pay attention, because we're going to need to learn whatever it is a reservation is to answer that last question. Now we can go back. We're going to read through it. We actually do have the ability here to use the line tool to underline and go back and show your proof and anything like that. So that way you can go back as we're answering the questions and find where you found that information from. Remember, just like our DCRs, we want to make sure that we are finding our proof from somewhere in the story. Native Americans of the Gulf Coastal Plains. The Gulf Coastal Plains of Texas, a region with a mild climate, lush vegetation. So what that means is there's lots of plants that grow there. So it could be just lots of grass, it could be trees, bushes, plants, anything. But lush means that there's lots of them. So there's not just a little bit of grass or a few trees, there's lots of them, lots of plants. And many waterways. So that could be like lakes and rivers and things like that. A region with mild climate, a mild climate, lush vegetation, and many waterways was home to many Native American groups prior to European exploration. 2 of the most well-known native groups that made their home in the prairies and plains of this region were the Caddo and the Karankawa. So there we learn the name of 2 different tribes that used to live there. Caddo and the Karankawa. Oh, sorry. The Caddo, the largest native group in this, lived in the piney woods of East Texas. They were farmers who took advantage of the fertile soil in the area by planting crops such as pumpkins, beans, and corn. So this group of Native Americans, because they lived in an area that had very good soil that could grow a lot of different things, they took advantage of that, like they said, by being farmers. So one of the ways that they would get their food is actually just by growing it. They even give us some examples of the things that they would grow to eat. They would grow pumpkins, they would grow beans, and they would grow corn. The Caddo also hunted game, such as deer, turkey, rabbit, squirrel, and the occasional buffalo. So just because they farmed and because they grew a lot of their food doesn't mean it was the only thing that they ate. They also told us that they were hunters. And when it says they hunted game, that's just another way sorry. It's just another way for them to say that they hunted animals. They give us examples of the animals they might have hunted. They hunted deer, they hunted turkey, they hunted rabbits, they hunted squirrels, and they hunted buffalo. They built beehive-shaped huts that were constructed with a wood frame and covered with mats of dried grasses. Some of their homes were up to 50 feet high and housed several. And it kind of stops there. It kind of gets cut off, but the next slide has a map for us. So we can see here this kind of green color is the Gulf Coastal Plains. So they've mentioned two of these tribes here, the Caddos and the Karankawa, that would live in this region of Texas. So we can see the kind of area Caddos would live in, the Karankawas live over here in this region. They give us a picture to go along with it. And they even show us a picture of what their houses would look like. Like they said, they were kind of shaped like a beehive. And some of them, they said, were 50 feet high. We can see an example of that like in the background, one of the really, really high ones. So they housed several families. The Caddo lived in villages and were ruled by a major chief known as a Cadi. Each Caddo group was also part of a larger confederacy that worked together to keep their villages safe from enemies. So they would all live in different villages, kind of the same way that we live in different towns, but each village worked together with other villages to keep everybody safe. The Caddo Indians are perhaps most well known for their fine pottery, elaborate ceremonies, enormous burial mounds, and the great gift they gave to our state, its name. So they were very, very good at making things like pottery. They said they had very impressive burial mounds where they would put people when they died. And they said that it's because of the Caddo group that Texas has its name. The name Texas comes from the Caddo word Tejas, which means friend. So in their language, they had a word Tejas, which meant friend, and that eventually became Texas, the name of our state. As a result of European expansion in the mid-1800s, the Caddo were forced to move from Texas to a reservation in Oklahoma. So as more and more people came over here from Europe, they pushed the Caddo group off of the land where they used to live. As more and more people came in, they wanted to live where the Caddos live. And so they kind of pushed them, they forced them to move away. And when they made them move away, they went to a reservation in Oklahoma. A reservation is an area of land set aside for Native Americans. So because all these people from Europe came over, and because, like I said, they wanted to live where these Native Americans had lived, when they forced them off of their land, when they pushed them away and made them move away from their land, they kind of made deals with them. And they said, if you leave your land and you let us have it, we'll give you some land over here. So that's what the reservation was the land that they were kind of promised, if you leave, you can have this land over there. They still had to move and they still had to give up their land, but the deal was that if they did, they would get to keep the land over there. Though their lives today are very different than the lives of their ancestors, Caddo customs and traditions have been passed down through the generations. Today, Caddo Indians continue to honor their heritage with traditional festivals and celebrations. So this is a tribe that is still around today, that there are still people from this group of Native Americans that still celebrate the traditions and still celebrate their festivals, which is pretty neat to think about. This has been going on for a very long time. Unlike the Karankawa Indians were nomadic and migrated from place to place based on the season. So that's an important word there. They even underlined it for us, nomadic. So nomadic means that they would live in a place for a while and then they would move. They'd live in that new place for a while and then they would move. They told us that they moved based on the seasons. Big difference for that is because, like they said, the Caddo, they were, even though they would hunt, a lot of things that they did were they also did a lot of farming. If you're going to be a farmer, it wouldn't make sense for you to work really, really hard, really quick. Who's ever planted anything? Plant flowers, or if you have a garden at your house or anything like that. I just want you to raise your hand if you've ever planted things or taken care of plants or something like that. Okay, good. So a good amount of us have. So those of you that have know that it's not always very easy. It's not like you just go out to the ground and you throw seeds down and you put water and that's it. It's something that you have to take care of. If there start to grow weeds and things like that, you have to get rid of the weeds. You have to keep watering the seeds. You have to take care of them. If the Caddo were farmers and they were going to work hard to grow those things like the beans, the pumpkins, corn, it wouldn't make sense for them to start doing all this work, start taking care of the plants, and then leave to go live somewhere else. That'd be a lot of hard work for nothing. So the Caddo Indians, because where a lot of where they got their food was farming, they would stay in one place so they could keep watching over their vegetables, make sure they were growing, make sure they could take care of them. And so that way when they were finished growing, they could actually pick the vegetables and eat them. The Karankawa didn't do the same thing. They didn't get as much of their food from farming. Because of that, they didn't have to wait around in one place for their food to grow and to become ripe before they could pick it and eat it. They would move around. One of the reasons why, and we'll read it right here, is one of the reasons why they would move around is because a lot of their food they would get from like hunting or fishing. If you were to go hunting or fishing and you were to stay in one place the whole time and you would just keep hunting or keep fishing, keep hunting or keep fishing, eventually you would catch all the fish in that area, or you would get all the animals in that area and there'd be nothing left. And even if you kept hunting and fishing in that same area, there'd be no animals or no fish left for you to get, which means that you wouldn't have any food. So they would have to move around, because if they stayed in one place and they stayed there for too long, they would end up eating all the animals there and then they wouldn't have any food. So they would stay there for a while and then they would move to somewhere else. They'd give the animals a chance to come back, to not eat all of them. And that way later on they could always come back and there would still be animals there. That way they didn't get rid of or kill or catch or eat all the animals in the area. They said that it also had to do with the season. So depending on the weather, they could move to a place where it would be a little bit more safer, a little more comfortable for them to live there. During the winter time, the Karankawa lived along the Gulf shore in large villages. They used dugouts, canoes made by scooping out a long log to fish and gather shellfish. So they even had a way to make boats. So they didn't have to stand on the beach and fish from there. They made boats out of logs. They would kind of, like it says, they would scoop out the middle, or they would dig out the middle of the log so they'd have a space so that they could sit. They would take these logs and go out into the Gulf, and they could catch fish, or they said that they could even gather shellfish, things like shrimp or maybe crabs or things like that. In the summertime, the Karankawa broke up into smaller groups. So that's interesting. It says during the winter they would all live in one big group, and during the summer they would split up into smaller groups. Why do you think they would do that? Why would they stay together in the winter and then in the summer they would split up? What do you think, Noah?
I think because like there's so they go in like different places and they gather up materials for the winter.
Okay, maybe the summer they used it to gather materials for the winter. That's a good idea. Does anyone else have a different idea why they might have been together in the winter and then split up in the summer? Kaylee, what do you think?
In the winter, none of the plants were alive, so they had to stay nearby and use like their own homes to not.
That's okay. What do you think? You said they had to stay nearby. Why? Why would you have to stay nearby in the winter?
Because you would get cold.
Okay. So during the winter it gets cold. So maybe they all had one big group in the winter so that way it was easier for them to keep warm. Maybe. Let's see. These smaller groups, each ruled by one chief, moved further inland to hunt small animals and gather roots, berries, nuts, and small plants. So, almost a little bit like what both of you had said. So, they would break up into these smaller groups in the summer, they would split apart, and they would hunt and they would gather different things. So, probably in the winter, they could all come back and all the different berries and roots and things like that that they had gathered, they could share. And then, like Kaylee said, it was probably a lot colder in the winter too. So now it's easier for them to keep warm if they're all in one big group. Like the Caddo, the Karankawa were also affected by European expansion. Unfortunately, they did not end up as well. By the mid 1800s, the Karankawa group had died out. Many contracted diseases that had been brought to North America by Europeans, and others died in battles with the American and European colonists. So, when these people from Europe came over, and they wanted to live in this land, they wanted to live in the place that belonged to the Karankawa. And they tell us that the Caddo, like we saw, ended up moving to a reservation. The people that came, the people from Europe, told them, if you move, if you go live over here, then you can have that land and we'll just take this land. But the Karankawa didn't have or didn't end up quite as well as the other group did. They said one of the things that happened to them was that number one, they got these different diseases, different illnesses from people that came over from Europe. People from Europe kind of had they had different germs, different sicknesses that people here, the Native Americans, hadn't had a chance to deal with yet. Normally, when you get sick, your body makes antibodies and your body kind of fights it off, right? Like when you get a cold, you might be sick for a few days and then your body fights it off, you feel better, and then your body is able to kind of fight off those germs from getting the cold. In this case, the people that came over from Europe, the Native Americans, their bodies weren't used to fighting the different kinds of diseases and sicknesses that the people in Europe had. So when the people in Europe came over and they brought over their sicknesses, their germs, their diseases with them, the Native Americans, their bodies weren't used to fighting that off. So if they got sick, they got very, very sick. So a lot of them ended up dying because of the diseases. Not only that, but again, these people that came over from Europe, they came over and they wanted the Karankawa's land. They wanted to live where they lived. So when they came over and they basically kind of said, "Hey, this is really nice land you have. We really like where you guys live. I'm gonna take it." And the Karankawa said, "No, that's not the way this works. You can't just come over and tell me that my house is your house now." And so they would fight over it. They would have battles over who got to keep the land. The people from Europe wanted it. The Karankawa said, "No, this is ours. We've been here for forever." And because of those battles, some of the Karankawas died from the battles. So because of a combination of fighting and these new illnesses, these new diseases, the Karankawa died out. So here's some more pictures for us to see. There's some Karankawa. And then here we can see like kind of what they talked about. We can see far away in the back there some of those canoes that they might have had. We can see one sitting there on the beach. We can see that some of them went out hunting. They got a deer. We can see some of the other animals that they had hunted. They're kind of hanging them out here so they could dry and so that they could use them to eat. And we see some of them, the ones that don't have their canoes, are kind of walking out into the water to gather whatever little fish or shellfish are right there by the shore. Although the Caddo and Karankawa no longer occupy Texas soil, our state is currently home to two other Native American groups. The Alabama Coushatta Indians have a reservation outside Livingston, and the Kickapoo Indians live on a reservation in Eagle Pass near the Mexican border. So even though, yeah, they're hanging the birds usually because if they're trying to clean the birds, they would need a place where they could just like hang out, and then kind of like the way that now people eat beef jerky, they could do the same thing. If they use the sun and the heat dry out the meat on the birds, they could turn them like into bird jerky, I guess. And so that way they wouldn't have to worry about cooking it. It would already be preserved by the sun and by the heat, and they could eat it later. Yeah, they have some pretty cool displays at different museums and things like that about different tribes. And this last paragraph tells us that even though the Caddo group went ahead and they moved on to a reservation outside Texas, and even though the Karankawa group died out, there are two other groups that still live here in Texas: the Alabama Coushatta Indians and the Kickapoo Indians. The birds, yeah, they would kill these ones look like either birds or rabbits. Let me see if I can tell if I zoom in. Actually, you know what? They look like fish. I can see the little tails from here. So these might have been fish that they caught, because you can see that there's also a net here. So I think these were fish that they had caught, but they're doing the same kind of thing. They're hanging them on the stick here, and they're letting them dry out, so that way they can eat them later on. These are probably fish that they got in the nets, which might be what this group of people are doing over here. They might have a net with them and they're dragging it through the water to catch all the fish. And then they could just bring them over here, take them out of the net, and then hang them out to dry. Or, I mean, they could always clean off the scales and then cook them over a fire or something. For those of you who might have ever been fishing, you might know what that's like. It's kind of hard sometimes because the fish like to fight, and they are much stronger than you think. Fish are not like little weak tiny things. They can be pretty strong. Yeah, I'm pretty sure those are fish, Kaylee. If you look really closely, you can see that all of them have tails at the end. So I think these were fish that they caught in these nets here. Yes, Jadine.
Some of my sentences, it's like saying I spelled it wrong. when I know I spelled it right.
I can go check on it and see.
Okay.
Okay, but that is the end of that passage. So make sure that you go through and you want to answer these 6 questions. So right now, all the boxes are just blank boxes. Make sure that you go through and you put an answer for all of the questions. Okay, let me check yours, Christopher. And then Jadine, you were saying that it was telling you you're misspelling stuff, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let me check yours.